Welcome, everyone, to Indications and Warnings with Chuck Pfarrer, co-produced by Alan Brewer. Chuck and I are recording this episode of Indications and Warnings on January 17, 2025. It is day 1059 of Russia's full-scale genocidal invasion of the Ukraine. Chuck, today we are just 3 days away from President-elect Donald Trump's inauguration. I would expect we'll get some clarity during his inaugural speech and in the first few days of his administration about what he intends to do or not do on behalf of Ukraine.
Well, right. And during his campaign, he was famous for saying he could resolve this crisis in one day. He had people who believed him and didn't believe him, and some of them, both sides voted for that. More discerning listeners would probably realize that this isn't a problem that is solvable in one day. The latest estimate from the Trump camp is 6 months, which I would say in 6 months, there could be some sort of negotiation. But interestingly enough, Alan and I were talking before the show. I don't see it so much as Ukraine needing to negotiate, but rather Russia needing to negotiate.
I think that's true. As a matter of fact, when I reviewed the news over the last few days, Chuck, and started to take a bird's eye view of 2024 and the current state of the zero line, I began to feel more and more that Ukraine is stronger today than they have been at any time in the course of this war. The very first evidence of that to me is the success Ukraine is having attacking oil refineries, fuel depots, command centers, and Russian air defense, by the way, deep inside Russia. They struck next to Engels airfield, the fuel depot, twice. It burned for 5 days. Then Ukraine reignited it. The estimate is that Ukraine has probably degraded that fuel depot in a way to eliminate 900 sorties of the Russian Tu bombers. These are the bombers that are launched almost every night by Russia, aiming terror and destruction at Ukrainian infrastructure and Ukrainian civilians. That, to me, is a pretty big win for Ukraine.
That really is a pretty big win. And let's put on the clothespins on our nose and walk back through the Russian infosphere and take a couple of deep breaths, remembering if you give Ukraine ATACMS, it's going to cause us to cross a red line. We won't tolerate strategic targets being struck in Russia. To our Russian listening guests, Engels 2, its ammunition dump was struck. That's 700 kilometers away from the zero line. Engels fuel depot was struck, again, 700 plus kilometers from the zero line. As Alan just pointed out, preventing 900 sorties of strategic bombers to fire cruise missiles into Ukrainian apartment buildings, that is a major win. And to swing it all back with, those aren't U.S. weapons provided by the United States or NATO. Those are indigenously produced, dare I say, homemade Ukrainian weapons. And I also like to do a little victory lap for this. The Engels 2 Air Base, strategic aviation base, is probably Russia's most important strategic aviation location, certainly its most conspicuous, certainly its most storied, and its air defense is certainly the most up because they got their clock cleaned twice in 1 week. So believe me, the colonel in charge of the air defense, he's on his way to Moscow, where a balcony is waiting for him. And I just love to see it when these things happen.
Oh boy, so do I. You know, I think it's been almost every night. I know that Ukraine has taken a few nights off, but I expect in the morning when I check news from Ukraine to see a report about an oil refinery strike, a fuel depot strike, a command center strike, and yes, all with homemade Ukrainian weapons. Ukraine has been striking oil refineries for almost all of 2024. And I was looking at what impact that has had on Russia's oil refining capacity. Back in March of 2024, it was estimated that Ukraine had successfully reduced Russia's oil refining capacity by 12%. That's pretty significant. As of December 2024, so just last month, estimates are that Ukraine has degraded Russian oil refining capacity by 17%. So, it's a 50% increase between March and December. Again, evidence that Ukraine is winning a strategic war that I would say Russia isn't even fighting.
No, and there is a reducing production capability and reducing production capability. Critically, the production of diesel fuels, which is what most armored vehicles run on, not all of them, but most of them, Russia no longer exports diesel fuel. It can't. It has to reserve this for its domestic consumption. Also, its exports of gasoline, they're not curtailed completely, but they are way down as well. And of course, that has military use as well. We talk about Ukraine being stronger than it's ever been, and certainly in terms of addressing long-range strategic targets. Most of the targets we talked about here, they are 1,200 kilometers from the border, 600, 800. They are widespread. Every one of these targets means the weapon infilling hundreds and hundreds of thousand kilometers of Russian air defense environments, and they're still getting through. So I just had one more corollary to what you said, Alan. And I'm going out on a little bit of a limb here, but I don't think that far. To me, Russia is weaker militarily than it has been since World War II. Why do I say that? Well, they've lost close to 800,000 casualties in a 72-hour military operation that they are never going to win. Right? If you look at burn rate, material losses, ground gained, it will take them something like 1,500 years to get to Poland. So, right. So we are talking quagmire. But the other thing is, so how did they do this year? Well, this year, it talked to certain people. It's tut, bad for Ukraine. They're losing. They're fighting in Pokrovsk. And I put it this way. It would be horrifying if I were to tell you that Ukraine lost 400,000 men and only took back from Russia the size of LA County. That would be a catastrophe. But that's what Russia did. 400,000 dead, casualties rather, they took back LA County. That ain't winning.
No,
that ain't winning.
It's not winning. Today's casualties, 1,670, and that's above the 7-day average. These are daily casualty figures for the combined Russian and North Korean forces. The Institute for the Study of War predicted today that the North Korean force of roughly 12,000, primarily fighting in Kursk, could be eliminated as a useful military co- coherent unit by April. By
Absolutely.
April.
By April, there will be nobody left. And they're mostly over 1,000 troops a day for Russia. They've hit 2,000 troops a day. Sometimes they're 1,400, sometimes they're 1,200, sometimes today I believe it was 1,800. So we lose sight of that. So what is that in military terms? Well, about 1,000 people, that's about a battalion of soldiers, right? That's a couple of companies. There's, let's say there is 12, 12, 24. There's 36 people in a platoon. There are anywhere from 3 to 5 platoons in a battalion. Uh, you're looking at every time they go out to fight, and we've talked about this, they lose between 35 and 100% of the people they send into combat every day, right? Some units get totally wiped out. Some units just get wiped out 50%, some units 30. The North Koreans, and we have seen from video evidence, have been set into some of the most god-awful, ill-conceived, I won't even say suicidal, because it was murder, to send people in one case. So you're looking at a field and it comes together. Here's the apex of one of the corners. 2 groups of North Koreans are set out into this field in a natural funnel,
Yeah.
charging across the field. No one is covering them with machine gun fire. Mortars, no. Indirect fire, no. Heavy machine guns, no. Artillery, no. Aircraft, no. Just these guys running through waist deep snow. How do you think it turned out?
Well, it doesn't.
Broad daylight.
Yep, and broad daylight. Obviously, it couldn't have turned out well. The North Koreans don't even have drone support in their attacks. Kursk, I think, is also evidence that Ukraine is in the strongest position it's ever been in the course of this war, not only because they have seized Russian territory, but because they have followed on their original success in Kursk with even more attacks, aiming again at Russian logistical hubs. It was an opportunity Ukraine created for itself by inflicting so many casualties on the 50,000 plus Russian forces sent to Kursk by Putin in order to take it back.
Right. And remember, the Kursk offensive, which started in August, people had been clamoring for Ukraine. I love the sort of war correspondence urging Ukraine to do something, to go on the offensive, to do something. Okay, Wolf Blitzer, that's great. What are you going to do? Right? They wanted to take offensive action. They are up against what's still numerically and materially a superior enemy. Ukraine had to pick a spot that would not only be a surprise, but they had to do their homework on the spot and say, okay, let's say we do cross the border into Kursk province, Kursk Oblast, which is a big place. Where does the road network and the topography and the lakes and the forest, where are things going to come together for us to make whatever we seize at whatever cost, great or small, where is a place that will be easy to defend? They couldn't have picked a better place than Kursk. They are now dug in and fortified in a sort of linear north-south blob where they control the interior lines of communication, which come right across the frontier into Kursk Oblast. The roads spread out in such a manner that the Ukrainian defenders of this taken territory, well, they have interior lines of communication. So one of the reasons Russian casualties are so hard is that Russians have to travel farther to fight. They have to move, as we say, around the outside of the barn when all Ukraine needs to do is orient their forces. And we have seen, the Koreans, to the surprise of no one, are being squandered. They are they are being killed in their tens, hundreds, and thousands. And as you pointed out, Institute for the Study of War says that the full Korean force of approximately 12,000 combatants will be hors de combat, meaning attrited, no longer in the military business, and this will be in April. Wow. In fact, I'll even go a little farther. I don't think they're going to make it to the middle of March. Just my tip. I don't think so.
It's quite possible. When we think about Kursk, back in August, when it was announced to the world that Ukraine had invaded Russia, this would be the first time Russia was invaded since the Second World War. No one knew how this operation would turn out. No one knew what its aim was. No one knew back in August if Ukraine intended to go much farther than they went, to hold on to what they took, etc. Well, here we are now in 2025. We know what Ukraine intended to do with the Kursk incursion, to seize and hold. They were fully prepared to do that. Seizing Russian territory embarrasses Putin. It gives Ukraine a pretty good negotiating platform if negotiations ever take place. They have Russian land to trade now. So I would say this again, evidence that Ukraine is in the strongest position and is as strong militarily as it has ever been in the course of this war. Further evidence is how well planned, how well executed, and how secret Ukraine was able to keep this Kursk incursion so that they took Russia by surprise. Again, all elements to me that show Ukraine being in a very strong position.
Yeah, and very extraordinarily well thought out. So let's say the order comes down from on high, National Command Authority. I want an offensive and I want it right now. If everything that was allocated to the Kursk offensive was used somewhere else, let's say it was used retake Vuhledar, what would that do? Well, it's great to liberate some occupied territory, but in terms of bargaining power, blue chips later to be played on the poker table of negotiations, it's not as good as 400 square kilometers of Mother Russia. And, we talk about what are the relative strengths here and weaknesses of the belligerents. Well, the point we're making, and I think I'm willing to argue this with pretty much anybody, that Russia is very likely at the weakest point it has been since World War II. Why do I say that? Well, they've lost almost 800,000 people. When's the last time they lost 800,000 people? They've lost almost 10,000 tanks, which take decades of production to produce those. We've already seen the effect that just the tank problem is having on the battlefield when they're driving T-62 tanks into armored combat. That doesn't work, man. That isn't it. You're not going to take Elvis Presley's tank and win a tank fight with it. It doesn't happen. So, and just this year, again, is this the weakest the Russians' army's been since World War II? Well, they've lost 400,000 people this year. We've talked about minimal gains. This is hollowing out the Russian army. And it doesn't get talked about very much here, but the Russian army is not getting stronger. Their morale is not getting better, and their equipment isn't getting any newer.
Well, the Russian army isn't getting stronger. And even though Putin has assembled, 400,000 new recruits and new contract workers in Russia who are basically impressed off the street and out of the factories to go to war in Ukraine. And there are plenty of Russians who are signing up for that $30,000 bonus to go fight in Ukraine. These 400,000 new arrivals have no training, no experience. This isn't a one-to-one exchange with that experienced Russian soldier in Ukraine. It is a replacement force, just barely, but it's not a one-to-one replacement.
Yeah, and let's talk some real brutal numbers here. He's talking about inducting 400,000 more civilians, and that is about the burn rate for a year.
Yeah.
So if you were in the previous induction class of 400,000, for all effects and purposes, those guys are all dead. Now, there may be a couple hundred or a couple thousand who, by the grace of God or good assignments, somehow got through the year, but he's shoveling in civilians. And just today, you and I saw a video of Russian police went to a shopping mall and impressed everybody who was anywhere from 16 to 65. You're coming with us, like the press gangs in the Royal Navy. Those guys don't make good soldiers, and especially if you give them 1 week's training and 1 week's transportation. That's it.
And those workers being impressed, they're from Kazakhstan, they're from Kyrgyzstan, they're from Uzbekistan. They have gone to Russia, in some cases actually invited to Russia to fill jobs. And this is their final reward. They get impressed into the Russian army. When we were talking earlier about the Ukrainian attacks on oil refineries, fuel depots, command posts deep inside Russia, it raises this question in my mind, Chuck. Is Russian air defense actually up to the job of defending its own critical infrastructure? One of the figures I see here, since the start of the invasion, Ukraine has destroyed over 1,000 air defense systems. Now, these are both from the battlefield, from Crimea, from Belgorod Oblast, from Kursk Oblast. It was one of the very first things Ukraine did in preparation for the Kursk incursion. They found and took out those air defense systems. But they are also taking out air defense systems inside Russia. Has this left Russia's air defense in tatters?
Yeah, I think it has. And in the term of art is SEAD, suppression of enemy air defense. And part of that is DEED or dead, destruction of enemy air defense. But in so many cases, Ukraine is able to, if not outright destroy, some of Russia's best air defense systems, S-300s, S-400s. It's also been rumored that at least one S-500 Prometheus system, the Russian equivalent of the Patriot, has also been taken out. But even if these air defense complexes are not destroyed, Ukraine has learned and figured out and innovated ways in which the effectiveness of these air defense units can be lowered. They strike them on the seams where the sensors come together. They present them with a variety and type of different incoming threats at various altitudes, various presentations. Some are very sophisticated air deployed mauled American-made air defense decoys. Some of them are drones made out of cardboard. Some of them are turbojet and even rocket augmented turbojet powered. There's a new thing for it. There never was a rocket powered turbojet cruise missile, but they are so good about flooding the zone, about integrating and changing the threat vectors so that you've got a target, and it may initially come under attack by cardboard drones that are moving at about 20 miles an hour and attack the sensor nodes. And then comes a second wave and a third wave. And, you just look at the list of targets that Ukraine has been able to address. The more Russian air defense systems are destroyed, the fewer they have to spread out to cover all of the important targets. So that layer of protection is getting thinner and thinner and thinner. And again, is Russia stronger now in its air defense than it was 2 years ago? Categorically not.
And again, this is the result of how Ukraine has chosen to fight in self-defense. They are fighting a strategic war, aiming successfully at Russian oil refining capacity, aiming at fuel depots, aiming at Russian air defense, aiming at Russian military command posts, which, it isn't to say that Ukraine doesn't have some problems it needs to solve on the zero line. It does. President Zelensky the other day said that Ukraine has about 990,000 in total fighting in the armed forces, so almost 1 million people. They're obviously not all on the zero line. Plenty of those people are in the rear in support, but about 1 million Ukrainians fighting against a superior Russian force, but they need more, and mobilization, recruitment, and even training is and remains a problem for Ukraine. But
yeah, and in the way this war is going, and we've talked about this since in the last couple of thousand days, there has never been a war like this. There has never been a war with first-person drones. There's never been a war where U.S. naval surface warfare has been conducted by unmanned surface vessels. There hasn't been a war like this. And in terms of what the traditional number of infantry that would be necessary for ground combined arms, ground maneuver warfare, that calculus is changing. Okay. Look, and I'm a naval officer, right? I am trained in warfare. I've trained on joint staffs, but I can look at this and say, look, this isn't your grant. This isn't Anzio, right? This isn't Normandy. There are unmanned ground vehicles prowling the battlefield with thermal cameras and 10,000 rounds of armor-piercing ammunition, right? There are 19-year-old kids with drone controllers. He's got 17 drones in holding patterns, and he's vectoring them in one after another against targets. We do know that when it comes to innovating, technological innovations, when it comes to improvising, when it comes to evolving tactics rapidly on the battlefield, Russia is stuck in 1983. Another reason why they're never going to win this war. It is never going to happen. So this war will be studied for centuries.
Yeah.
Centuries. This is like the Mongols inventing the compound bow. This is like the stirrups being given to European cavalry. It's the end of World War I and the end of World War II and the end of all proxy conflicts. It is totally different, Alan. And you've been studying it for the last 3 years.
Well, Ukraine was the very first country in history to create an unmanned forces service. So this is Ukraine organizing a complete service of the military around drone warfare in the air, on land, and on sea. First country in history to do that. And again, this is Ukraine showing its strength when it comes to innovation in drone warfare, in the development of all kinds of drones with specific missions in mind. It's Ukraine who gets there first. Ukraine now can produce about 1 million drones a year for use on the battlefield. And that's not all. President Zelensky the other day said that Ukraine will be producing about 30% of all the weapons it needs to continue this fight in 2025, including newly developed Ukrainian ballistic missiles that will have the range to reach Moscow.
And should that not give pause to our Russian listening guests? 30% of Ukraine's arms requirements in domestic production. And that's something that has to happen. Because I'm not talking about negotiations now or in the future or 6 months. I don't think we're there yet. I think it's premature to talk about negotiating anything with someone who kicked in your back door, burned up your kitchen, and is now sleeping in your master bedroom. Tell me when the negotiations start, okay? But going forward, this conflict will eventually end. And unfortunately, Ukraine can't move, right? They can't get out of this neighborhood. They're going to have a bad neighbor for the rest of history going forward. They need to be strong. Ukraine cannot afford to be as weak as it was left by its Soviet partners.
In other words, Chuck, Ukraine has not only put themselves in a very strong negotiating position, they have put the man who believes he is the lead negotiator, Donald Trump, in an equally strong position. So I hope someone in the new Trump administration is listening to this show and reaches the same conclusion that you and I have, that Ukraine is as strong as it has ever been in the course of this war and is getting stronger. You put that together with the point that you're making, Russia is weaker than it's been since the end of the Second World War. I think you have a very strong case for giving Ukraine everything it needs right now to decisively win this war. But it's certainly not the time to push Ukraine into negotiations that could, frankly, end badly for them.
Well, and all we have to do is look to recent history, to the First and Second Chechen Wars. Russia negotiated a settlement to the First Chechen War, which was totally made in bad faith. It rearmed, it retooled, it rolled back into Chechnya, and it created one of the most horrible repressive dictatorships on earth. That isn't the way the Ukraine situation is going to go. It simply can't. And and again, Ukraine needs a bright future. And living in a bad neighborhood, you want a bright future, let's face it, you might want a concealed weapons permit. And we have to make sure that Ukraine has what she needs to defend herself. And frankly, I mean, I see Ukraine as a full member of NATO, and that will ultimately be her guarantor will be NATO.
Absolutely. I think it has to be. Most NATO members favor Ukrainian membership. NATO needs Europe's strongest army. It's Ukraine's army. There are some undecideds. Unfortunately, the United States is undecided about Ukraine's membership in NATO. And then, of course, there are Putin allies of NATO member countries, Viktor Orban of Hungary being the most prominent, he would block Ukraine's membership in NATO if he could.
Yeah, and to people like Mr. Orban, I would say, Putin looks like he's totally in control, and he is until he isn't. And I don't know when this is going to happen. I don't know how. I don't really know why, but I promise you, when Putin falls, it will be sudden. And his stop will be the last stop. It will be over for him, like it was for Ceausescu, like it was for Gaddafi, like it was for Saddam Hussein. He's going to get pulled out of a spider hole somewhere. So, Mr. Orban, you're betting on the wrong horse, right? You really are. And given your own politics, when Putin falls, so will you.
That's exactly right. He's not only betting on the wrong horse, he's riding the wrong horse.
He's riding the right, absolute, very well put.
And if you see Viktor Orban, he's no jockey. A little too heavy for that.
Clydesdale division.
Exactly. Yeah, no Bill Shoemaker. Well, we're all waiting to get some clarity from Donald Trump and the new administration coming in. We'll begin to get some clarity of what they intend to do on behalf of Ukraine, probably on Monday when Trump delivers his inaugural address. But we do have some maps to take a look at here today, Chuck. And this will also help us, I think, contrast what I call Ukraine's strategic war, which I think they are winning quite decisively, and the tactical war on the zero line, which Ukraine is fighting sensibly and tenaciously.
Right. We are, circumstances have dictated to Ukraine, Mike Johnson, that they are in a defensive posture and they are fighting a defensive struggle at this point. That doesn't mean you're losing if you're on defense, right? The Viet Cong were almost always on defense, and I don't have to tell you who won that war. The patriots in the American Revolution were constantly on defense. I don't have to tell you who won that war. When you are in a defensive war, or you are in a situation where you have an enemy-rich environment, as we have in occupied Ukraine, with an enemy that, regardless of tactical necessity, military relevancy, will constantly keep attacking every day. They're going to just keep coming at inane places like Velika Novosilka, like Chasiv Yar, other places that they have psychologically invested into, but aren't really well thought out tactically. Just because you are on the defensive doesn't mean you cannot be winning an attritional war, which means killing 2,000 Russians a day. Again, that doesn't make Russia stronger. It makes them weaker. And there is no light at the end of the tunnel for Russia. They don't have technological innovations coming. They don't have new leadership coming. They don't have new tactics coming, Alan. They have the same old thing, and it's not going to win this war.
And they do the same old thing. It is this use of mass exclusively on the zero line that Russia chooses in order to grind forward. It appears they grind forward every single day. Well, that actually is not true. The zero line is very fluid, and if you look at the length of it, the intensity of Russian attacks are much different. For example, in Kherson, 4 attacks, kind of desultory attacks in Kherson. 50 attacks around Pokrovsk. So a huge difference almost anywhere you look. In Kherson, lots of speculation about a river crossing, a lot of speculation up towards Kyiv that Russia wanted to set off on a new counteroffensive into Zaporizhia Oblast, maybe approach Zaporizhia city itself. Two attacks towards Kyiv overnight. But we're going to look at Kupiansk, Kremina, and Velika Novosilka. We'll get to a Pokrovsk map early next week while we see what develops there. But, in Kupiansk, Russia hasn't succeeded in finding any lodgment in any part of the Kupiansk city proper.
No, and it is going to be even a more complex and costly urban fight if they ever do. So if you are looking at the 1630 UTC 17 Jan map, which was the one put up this morning, zoom in as close as you can, and you can see the Kupiansk is sort of two urban areas bisected by north-south, the Oskil River basin. And you can actually see the topography. So there's a hilly eastern section, and then you can see that the western part of the city is on some very steep bluffs. What this means is the western part of the city can always fire down upon the eastern portion of the city. Coming across, attacking from the east, you've got to cross that wide open river valley. And it isn't just one stream. There are a number of small tributaries there. Every one of those is enough to stop a truck or a tank or anything else. Blue put this map in and first started showing this city map, and I will change it out into some larger area maps, but went to the city map projection on this about a month ago after the Russians tried and damn near got into the northern urban area by dressing up, painting up a couple of trucks and putting a bunch of guys in Ukrainian uniforms, and they damn near got into the city. So it didn't go well for them. And if you're having a costume party, folks, don't do it during wartime. If you're wearing the wrong uniform, that'll be a good time to quit smoking too, by the way. So that is Kupiansk. Don't you know that the Russians want it? We say we're going to be talking to a couple other places along the zero line that aren't really of any real great tactical importance. Kupiansk, however, remains a place of tactical and strategic importance. So Ukraine's going to want to hold on to this, and it's going to cost Russia a lot if they want to take it. And frankly, Alan, they don't seem up to the task just yet.
I don't think they are. And this actually is an excellent map for viewers to, as you say, Chuck, zero in on, expand it, take a look at the topography, and you will see there really is no place where Russia can cross the Oskil River, whether up towards Halobivka or down to the quarry south of Kupiansk. There's either high ground overlooking your forces as they approach, or there is water courses that also offer great defense, or there's simply open space, which is a kind of defensive advantage itself to Ukrainian defenders, especially in winter, especially with Ukraine's thermal sights on weapons and drones, and this would be probably a prime killing ground for Ukrainian snipers.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, throughout this war, uh, moving anyone across an open space is deadly. Uh, there's actually been a problem that Ukraine has been able to turn into a benefit in this war, and because Ukraine still lacks the material, the vehicles, the air defense, everything it needs to conduct large scale ground maneuver warfare. It is able to use drones, snipers, mines, aerial denial, munitions, and to frustrate the Russians in carrying out what used to be their strength, right? Their strength, large scale maneuver warfare, shock and awe. They're no longer capable of carrying that out, Alan. I mean, look, they are never going to launch a three-pronged attack on Kyiv. It's not going to happen. They couldn't dig General Zhukov up and make that happen. They lack the leadership. But look how Ukraine is making them pay. And frankly, what does large-scale ground maneuver warfare look like in the 21st century? That is a good question. I mean, we can ask General Ryan, we can ask General Hodges. Don't ask me, I'm a SEAL. To me, it looks like 20 guys kicking me. But these are some very bright minds, and they don't know either.
They don't. Both Mick Ryan and Ben Hodges have spoken about that, and this, of course, goes right to the heart of how much drone warfare has changed. So, one of the reasons, of course, Russia is no longer capable of combined arms and maneuver warfare. Ukraine has destroyed almost 10,000 Russian tanks, usually a big part of combined arms. But Russia no longer capable. I would think Ukraine probably is still capable. They have better leadership. They have better tacticians. They have better war planners. They don't have all they need to conduct combined arms maneuver warfare, but I bet they can figure out a way to do it, just as they used new electronic jamming in Kursk to undertake its latest tactical counterattack.
Yeah. So we're going to climb up to 100,000 feet where the air is not a lot of air to breathe and not a lot of good thinking gets thought up at that altitude. But I'm willing to go out on a limb here. This war is going to end when Ukraine uses combined arms ground maneuver warfare to push the Russians out. That's going to happen. But what does that look like in the 21st century, right? Everybody, you would be a fool to tell the world you know what that's going to happen, what that's going to look like. There are some great military minds that we have been graced to talk to in our previous shows. General Hodges, General Mick Ryan, these are scholars and futurists and men who have given quite a lot of thought to what 21st century warfare would look like. But even the developments overtook what they could think of, right? They didn't think that a nation without a navy could use drones and sink a Soviet capital ship. And I say Soviet because she was a Soviet ship. So what is it going to look like? It used to be you bring up your artillery, you pound the hell out of the bad guys, and you start at 3 a.m. At 7 o'clock, somebody shoots a flare up. Here come the tanks. Here comes the mechanized infantry. That's it. What does it look like now? Is it a swarms of 10,000 drones? Is it electronic warfare? What precedes the artillery bombardment? How do you maneuver in such a high density mine threat environment? There's no country on earth more mined than Ukraine. So many important questions that are not going to be, nobody on a talking head is going to figure this out. It's going to happen in the crucible of battle. That's where it's going to be figured out.
And you know who's going to figure it out? A Ukrainian,
You're
because
damn right.
they are the ones fighting the war, innovating on the battlefield, and they are the ones who have to solve this puzzle.
And there is a human factor that does not change. It does not change from the Peloponnesian War. It doesn't change from Alexander the Great. It doesn't change from Thermopylae, Valley Forge, Battle of the Bulge. It never changes. You need high morale, committed troops. If you don't have them, it's over for you. It's over for you. It was over for Napoleon when he lost his troops. He invaded Russia, he got them to Moscow, right? But even his foot soldiers knew it's over. And he lost virtually every battle on the way out to Russia. Some brilliant tactics and life saving maneuvers, but he started that invasion with the Grande Armée and he got out with his bodyguard.
Yeah.
Right? 4 guys and a carriage. So who has the human factors here? Ukraine.
Yeah, I think so. You know, when we go to the next map in Kremina, this it is a wide scale map. You take a look at it, it looks exactly like the kind of landscape where combined arms maneuver would work to Russia's advantage if they could just carry it off.
You know, you would think, and this is folks, when Alan and I lay down our heads at night in our far distant beds, we close our eyes and we can see the map of Crimea.
Yeah.
Because it almost never changes. This is a place where Russia has 10-1 superiority, overwhelming materiel superiority, ammunition superiority, superiority in maneuvering forces. This map has changed. The only place this map has changed is north of the Zerbets Reservoir. They're sticking out just a little bit from Ivanivka, where the Russians have sort of advanced across territory that, frankly, folks, avails them nothing, right? They've managed to push it, what is that, about 1.5 kilometers, so maybe about a mile. It's one thing to charge across an open snowy field for a mile. It's another thing to survive the night, that 1 mile you've advanced. It's quite another thing to wake up in the morning and hope that someone's going to bring you a hot cup of coffee and a donut, because they're not. So this gain here by Ivanivka is as tenuous as it can get. And look at the map when you can and blow it up and look at the topographics around there and notice that the Russians have been allowed to advance in a flat space overlooked by high ground. So it isn't the kind of place you're going to have a long career as a soldier. You're going to be dead in 36 hours tops.
And again, Russia has all the mass it needs to advance here. This might, in fact, be one of the places where people see these time lapse videos that have been made of the zero line, created actually in order to give the false impression that Russia's advance is widespread along the zero line and rapid, and it's neither.
No, there would need, so you'd see the lines coming and going, and you're on an XY axis. It would need a Z axis, I think, would be very important to show the number of Russian dead in these areas. That would be a much more valuable data depiction. So you would have a plane and you could see the Russian red line advancing through Bakhmut and towards Kupiansk, but you would see this giant pile up of 70, 80, perhaps 100,000 Russian casualties just in Bakhmut.
And
Wow.
that is exactly the graphic that people need to imagine anywhere they look on the zero line, knowing that Russia loses to take 1 square kilometer, 100 or 200 soldiers on average. But there are some places like Bakhmut or Chasiv or like Pokrovsk where the Russian casualty figure to take 1 square kilometer, usually of open field, is in the thousands.
And generals and admirals are battle managers, right? You come up through the ranks, and of course, in a NATO army, you serve as a junior officer, you become a field grade officer, you go up. If you're a Navy SEAL, you're in training. You are an assistant platoon commander. You become a platoon commander. You squadron leader, element commander. You move up, and then you move up into the higher levels of command. You have to manage the resources that you're given. So you kind of imagine this: you're captain of a nuclear submarine. The thing costs several $billion. It is in itself, just one of them, the fourth largest nuclear power on Earth. You hand this guy this resource, he's in charge of it, right? But one of the most important things that he knows is the 100-man crew of that submarine, right? Those 100 guys. You hand someone a battalion in the Russian army, so the guy's a lieutenant colonel, he's a battalion commander, he'll lose 100% of his guys in one day to no purpose. And they don't fight, as they say, brigade task groups. No. We don't fight like that.
Yeah, the only purpose is in order to file your daily report so that you don't get an NKVD officer. I know the NKVD doesn't exist anymore, but an NKVD officer could come in and shoot you if you didn't follow your daily order that comes from the top.
Right. And this is the only way to explain these constant, unending, unimaginative, repetitive, pinprick attacks across the entire zero line. I can count on one hand the times in this war I have actually seen Russian forces converging on an objective. One hand, right? 1,000 days of war, maybe 6 times. And in none of those cases did they achieve the objective, because their converging attacks went from 9 a.m. to 11:30 a.m. this way, and then from 10:30 p.m. to midnight. But Alan, we talk about the mistakes are so inane, childish, idiotic. Where does it come from?
That is a really good question, and I don't have an answer for it. There are probably some experts in Russian culture and Russian military culture who could help us answer that question. Putin is militarizing his society, certainly militarizing the next generation of Russians. So sometime in the future, we're going to get that answer when Putin says, I want the Baltics.
But you know what? I think they're in such a hole now, Alan. And, you don't want to underestimate your enemy at all. But the Russian army is going to need a total reboot. They've got to totally rethink their leadership model. They totally have to rethink who is selected for command. They totally have to rethink the connection between national command authority, commander's intent, and tactics, techniques, and procedures. It's like it's fundamentally bent. I just don't know. I honestly, I don't see it. And when it comes to like closing the gap, who's going to get there first with a competent army of these two belligerents stabbing, and who's going to come out on top, get a breath, and emerge from the gymnasium invincible? Well, I think that's Ukraine.
Yeah.
I don't think it's Russia.
No, I don't think it is either. Um, if we move to the last map in Velika Novosilka, over the next few days, probably, certainly over the next 7 days, this will be news from the front that worries people. Another Ukrainian village retaken by Russia. Ukraine had liberated Velika Novosilka last spring. Yeah, but Russia is on the verge of surrounding Velika Novosilka. Does it make a huge difference?
It doesn't. Of all the maps that Alan and I put up, this one is on the smallest scale, where you're looking at a scale in meters, and you can see it's 2,000 meters. So we're right down into what is, a big village. I don't think I'd call it a small city. It was a place with a couple thousand people living in it. Ukraine's going to hold on to it as long as it is convenient, as long as they can kill more Russians daily than they lose defending it. But this is another one of those not meaningful military objectives. So you look up at 1 o'clock from Velika Novosilka, you see the TO5-18. That's the only highway in or out of this place. That's it. So Russia is fighting for a position at the end of a road it already controls, with roads going nowhere else. There is one other road out of town, the O Series highway, the 05, is that 09? It doesn't go anywhere. It peters out just at the top of the map. So again, these are the kind of places we joked, Ellen and I were joking, Omar Bradley would not be interested in Velika Novosilka, right? George Patton, General Sherman, nobody would be interested in this place. They would take their battle resources and use them to gain ground somewhere else. It wouldn't be to take this bombed out hulk of a town. And again, this has been a years-long process for Russia to get here. Alan and I covered the battle of the Mokryali River Valley. God, Alan, 2 years, right?
Oh yeah, and focused on it last spring when Ukraine freed Velika Novosilka.
Yeah. So again, as long as Russia fights like this, and every now and then we get one of those videos from the front, and a Ukrainian soldier turns to the camera and goes, "Thank God they're so stupid." This is it. Thank God that their colonels are this stupid as well.
We will be back with more maps from some of the hotspots on the zero line early next week. I also wanted to remind people, Chuck, as we approach January 20th here in the United States, why did Russia invade Ukraine? It's not only Putin's wish to recreate the Russian Empire, whether it's the empire Stalin created or the empire Catherine the Great created. Putin invaded Ukraine because Ukraine is rich in resources. The Atlantic Council just recently ran down a list of why Ukraine will become such a valuable member of the European Union. Ukraine ranks first in Europe in proven recoverable reserves of uranium ores. second in Europe, 10th in the world in terms of titanium ore. Second in the world in terms of reserves of manganese ores. In fact, about 12% of the world's manganese ores. Second largest iron ore reserves in the world. Second place in Europe in terms of mercury ore reserves. Third place in Europe, 13th in the world in terms of shale gas reserves. Something, by the way, that Putin wants to plug into. He wants to plug his energy industry into Ukraine's shale gas. Fourth in the world by the total value of its natural resources.
Wow.
Yeah.
Fourth in the world.
In the world. Wow. Seventh in the world in coal reserves. First in Europe in terms of arable land. So it's really Europe's breadbasket. Ukraine proves that even in the midst of war, even while 30% of its arable land has been mined. It's not plowable. It's not plantable. It's not able to be harvested. Third place in the world by area of black soil. So the very richest agricultural soil you can farm on. First place in sunflower and sunflower oil exports. Second place in barley production. Third largest producer and exporter of corn in the world. Fourth largest producer of potatoes. Fifth largest rye producer. Fifth place in the world in bee production.
Wow.
That actually, I mean, that makes sense. There's a lot of fertilization that needs to happen in Ukraine. You need a lot of bees to do it. Eighth place in the world in wheat exports, etc. Ukraine, according again to the Atlantic Council, this breadbasket of Europe can actually feed 600 million people.
And earlier in our broadcasts, and our colleague Axel Jacobson, whose background is in economics, who has deeply studied this subject, especially in the East, there were industrial plums that Putin offered to his oligarchs, right? So when the Soviet Union fell, this class of people raped the natural resources and the economy of the Soviet Union under President Yeltsin. And Yeltsin became a liability, a drunk. The greed of his family knew no bounds, and the shark feeding frenzy of oligarchs around Yeltsin. Putin was hired as an errand boy, as a grocery boy, to assure that the Yeltsin family would get away with whatever they got and crack the whip and the folding chair at this class of oligarchs. Well, 25 years later, what we're dealing with now, and it's almost this simple. Hello, Chuck Farsky, you oligarch that I made in charge of the Frisbee competition of, you know what, I need 250 million. I need $250 billion for the war, and I'm going to give you the steel mills in Mariupol. I'm going to give you the Azov. He went on and on. Axel could go on and on. This factory, this refinery, and it truly was raping Ukraine.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not going that well anymore.
No.
And we know what happens to oligarchs that don't want to play. They are found strangled with a beach towel in their this place on the Costa del Sol.
Yeah.
We know what happens to them. So again, That's the kind of contraption that isn't going to win a war, Alan.
No,
It isn't going to win a war.
but just running down these resources and assets of Ukraine is another way to emphasize why the incoming administration should think twice about pushing Ukraine into negotiations that could end badly. Not only is Ukraine stronger today than it has ever been in the course of this war, but it's stronger in order to protect its people, its liberty, its sovereign territory, and its future, which will be fueled by all these resources. And these are resources that Europe and the United States, the free democracies around the world, essentially need.
Absolutely. Even if the American foreign policy was strictly cynical, those resources, those goods, that technological innovation, the spirit of the Ukrainian people, a European people, they need a European future, and they're sacrificing for that, right? They have turned their face to the West, and Putin can't stand it. And I hope he gets used to it.
I hope he does too. Chuck and I will be back next week. If Chuck and I ever change our tune and become Vatniks, I'll be calling Chuck Farsky, and he'll be calling me Alan Brewski.
Alan Brewski. We should just defect. That'll be the day, folks. And if the war ends tomorrow, Alan and I are going to be doing the Reconstruction show. So
and those resources are going to be a big part of those Reconstruction shows. And let me tell you.
And look, we're in it to win it, just as you are. Thank you for listening. We thank you for the kind comments. Vatniks, keep trying. I love it when you rise to wit. Try to. I hate to say this, but please like and share and subscribe, because it helps the algorithm. Alan and I did not fly in here on our private jet. All we want to do is get the word out. So please help us, and we'll be back.
And join us next week in saying Slava Ukraini.
And Heroyam Slava.